share with you today, and in preparation for that message, there's a video clip that I want to share with you.
I'd rather invest in some real estate, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, wait, can you repeat that again, man? You're up and coming artist. What did you say you want to do?
I say invest in some assets as opposed to trick off my money on some liabilities like diamonds.
Even before fame, this aspiring star had a plan for his fortune.
You're trying to get land.
Exactly, homie. A real asset. Take care of my peoples, because, you know, it look good, but at the end of the day, you losing value.
He was just 20 years old in this interview with Hard Knock TV. Over the next decade, he'd become a beacon of hope in South Central LA, a Grammy-nominated artist, a father, an entrepreneur, an advocate. His name, Nipsey Hussle. But just as his dreams were really coming true, this past Sunday, he was shot dead in broad daylight in the middle of the community that he poured his heart and soul into.
He was a neighborhood prince. He brought a lot of hope and change to the community.
You might as well call him the president of the hood then, Barack Obama of the streets.
It was so much more he could have did. He was only 33 years old.
He seemed to walk a fine line between the hood and a hope for a new world. Rising out of poverty and violence, making it big, as documented in this Midas Touch video.
But Nip did more than his own thing. Nip took care of the poor people around here, the homeless. He took one homeless dude off the streets and put him in his Rolls Royce and pushed the shopping cart away and took him and bought him jewelry and got him haircuts and put him on his feet. Nipsey was nothing short of a servant to the people. They told him the problem, and then he took it to the powers that be that the other people didn't have access to.
So is he a bridge?
He's the architect of the bridge.
There's no one answer to how you change the hood or change the reality of what goes on. But what you gotta think about is when you don't have resources, you in survival mode. When you don't have resources, you in survival mode. When you don't have resources, you in survival mode. You know, so being in survival mode automatically rules out a lot of things because you don't care about morality, because you don't experience morality. You experience, you know, the need to survive. You don't experience, you know, fairness. You don't experience planning for the future. You just experience my ribs touching. You know what I mean? And it's better me than you. And, you know, it's a survival instinct that kick in. So I think once you get out of the survival mode, your morals come back closer to your daily decision making. You start thinking about what's right and what do I believe in. But until you get out of survival mode, you ain't got time to be worrying about right and wrong. You worrying about bottom line. You know what I mean? By any means necessary. So I think that economics is the answer. Economics is the answer. Economics is the answer. Empowering people economically is how you really, really impact. Empowering people economically is how you really, really impact. I think it's about impacting culture in a way that, you know, the mentality changes. And then also, you know, the institutions that exist, it's just a prison institution, really. It's like a pipeline to jail. It ain't no constructive institutions for real that meet you ground level. It's like whatever going on, if you can't figure it out, we gonna lock you up, bro. So whatever it is, yeah, it's on y'all. I think like you get people out of survival mode, they start thinking different. I did, you know, when I figured out, you know, how to get myself out of the situation. My approach to life and people was different. I wasn't so angry. I didn't have my guard up. I wasn't so aggressive, and I can't blame nobody. You know what I mean? That's thinking about how they gonna pay their rent. Or like going through not having food at the house, being young and having to go outside to hustle to feed themselves for school clothes. That's gonna change people. That's gonna make you feel away, and you can't fault them. You just gotta kind of empathize with the scenario and understand. You put a person in survival mode, they're gonna survive by any means. I couldn't make a blanket statement to just the young people doing dirt. I don't think that's honest. You know what I mean? It's context for everything. Nothing happens in a vacuum, you know? You know what I mean? It's context for everything. Nothing happens in a vacuum, you know?
Amen. Amen. If you have your Bibles, I want you to turn with me to Genesis chapter 4, verses 2 through 10 for our sermonic spotlight today as we reflect on As I've been reflecting on, and I suspect many of you have been reflecting on the tragic loss of our brother, right there in Genesis chapter 4 in the B clause of verse 2, the word of the Lord reads as follows. It says, "Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground. And in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel, for his part, brought of the firstlings of his flock the fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry." Somebody say he was very angry. "And his countenance fell. And the Lord said to Cain, 'Why are you so angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you've got to master it.' Cain said to his brother Abel, 'Let us go out into the parking lot.' And when they were in the parking lot in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel, Nipsey, and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, 'Where is your brother?' And he said, 'I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?'" Amen. And I want to try to preach today, church, from the thought, what killed Nipsey Hussle? Do me a favor, look at your neighbor and say, "Neighbor, oh neighbor, what killed Nipsey Hussle?" Come on, put your hands together, give the Lord praise today. What killed our brother? That's the question that I, perhaps like many of you and many people around the country, especially millennials and those in the entertainment community, have been trying to process over the past week, the tragic loss last Sunday of the hip-hop artist known as Nipsey Hussle. And whether we knew him or his music or not, we have been devastated by the story. And I happened to be preaching in Watts just last week, just a few hours before the shooting, and I remember literally being driven past the exit in Crenshaw and Slauson where Nipsey Hussle was murdered by a brother from his own neighborhood, from the very community he was trying to transform. And I think the story touched so many because Nipsey Hussle was an example of someone who attempted to rise up from the circumstances that shaped him, but rather than leaving his neighborhood, Nipsey was committed to trying to elevate his neighborhood. And so many get up out of the hood and they want to leave and they never come back. But Nipsey never forgot where he came from. And he was on a journey of consciousness raising and communal uplift, which is something that I think all of us should emulate. And his death touched me not because I knew him, I did not, but because he symbolizes something. He symbolizes the countless sisters and brothers who are losing their lives every day due to senseless acts of violence on the streets of America. And all week, I've been mourning not just for a rich and famous hip-hop artist, but for the hundreds and even thousands of nameless black and brown boys and girls who lose their lives on the streets of America. I grieve. I grieve because Nipsey is me. Nipsey is all of us. Nipsey is my cousin. Nipsey is my uncle. Nipsey is my friend. Nipsey is my neighbor. I grieve because even though I never met this beautiful black African brother of Eritrean descent, I feel that I know him nonetheless. I see him every day on the streets of America. I read about him in the newspaper. I hear about his stories on the television. I think Reverend Reginald Sharp said his best on Instagram the other day. He said, "Nipsey is just like me, a particle of eternity trapped in the nonsensical sphere of time. He was a child of God." And at the end of the day, I think all people ought to remember that not just him, but all of our sisters and brothers are children of God. It is when we reduce people to their zip code and their geography that we lose this sense of the fundamental humanity of all of human personality. And at the same time, church, my grief is being frustrated by the inability of our leaders to give us proper answers, the answers we need to keep this kind of thing from happening. I mean, I get prayers, church, but prayers and pity don't mean much if there aren't policies that are going to be put into practice. And when our leaders don't have meaningful answers, it leaves the community scrambling to come up with our own answers, whether it's when famous rappers like Nipsey are killed by one of their own, or when unnamed black men and black women have their lives cut short every day on these streets. In the immediate aftermath of Nipsey's death, there have been a series of speculations and interpretations around why he was killed. You heard them. A prevailing theme that I've seen on social media is the idea that Nipsey was killed by self-hate. You've seen the hashtags, you've seen the posts. That self-hate is our #1 enemy. That somehow they're claiming black people are inherently pathological, that some way we are jealous of one another's success, that we have this crab in a barrel mentality somehow inherently, and that as soon as you're a black person who's successful and make your way out, that you got to be careful because there is some other black person trying to take you out. Even one artist said, quote, that black people are our own worst enemies, unquote. Others have even advanced the view that Nipsey was killed for the documentary he was doing on the life and work of a holistic doctor by the name of Dr. Sebi, who proved in court in the 80s that he had cured people of AIDS and diabetes and other degenerative conditions through herbs and eating an alkaline diet, which I recommend for many of us today. But in this sermon, I want to offer an alternative assessment on what killed Nipsey Hussle. And by that, church, I want you to know that I am talking about something bigger than what killed this one individual man. But I'm talking about all of the black men and black women, including those in poor communities all across America who are losing their lives to this kind of violence, because gang violence and gun violence aren't the only types of violence that we're suffering from. We are being killed every day by psychological violence and economic violence and spiritual violence at every turn. So I'm not sure if you picked up on it in the quote that I played just moments ago, but Nipsey gave us a clue on how to answer this question, one that unfortunately I believe contributed to his own untimely passing. At the end of the clip, he was talking about youngins doing dirt in the street, and Nipsey said, I can't blame them really, because there's a context for everything. That's really key, because in order to solve a problem, you have to understand the context of the problem. And if you want to fix a problem, you got to get to the root cause and treat the issue at the causal level and not just treat the symptoms. In the aftermath of the riots in the 60s, Dr. King was asked what he thought about the riots and about people looting stores and destroying their own neighborhoods. And in response, Dr. King, quoting Victor Hugo, said this quote. He said, if a soul is left in darkness, sins will be committed. But the guilty one is not he who commits the sins, but the one who causes the darkness. In other words, like Nipsey said, there's a context for everything. And if you ignore the context, you'll come up with the wrong answers to the right questions. And we keep coming to these stories every time because our leaders don't deal and don't treat the root cause of the problems, and they keep giving us the wrong answers to the right questions. And if we want to know what killed Nipsey Hussle, we must try to understand the root of the problem, what Dr. King called the cause of the darkness. Come with me to our text today, because this story of Cain and Abel provides an interesting look at the material realities that cause class struggles that can boil over into acts of violence against your brother. The typical interpretation of this text is that it speaks about issues of jealousy and envy and sibling rivalry. We've heard sermons over and over and again about how Genesis 4 is about sibling rivalry and about jealousy and envy. But what is often missed, church, is the context. That this story is the product of ancient tensions between nomads and farmers in antiquity. Pastoral nomads or shepherds were people who cared for bread and managed herds of animals like goats and sheep and cattle and llamas and camels. The main form of subsistence for shepherds and their herds was basically moving from pasture to pasture, from one body of water to another, and consuming the crops and the resources that they found there. On the other hand, the people who settled in community developed a practice called farming. These sedentary agriculturalists took care of themselves and their families by growing the food that they ate and they sold. So nomads and shepherds did not like farmers because the sedentary lifestyle of the farming community attempted to control the movability and the movement of the shepherds. And the farmers didn't like the nomads and the shepherds because their sheep, Lord have mercy, kept trampling on their crops. Are y'all here today? This story is about a clash of cultures between shepherds on the one hand and farmers on the other hand, as violence and resistance often characterize their interaction. Cain and Abel are brothers, but the reason Cain is angry is because Abel's sheep, Lord help me say the right word, keep eating and consuming his crops. Cain is angry, y'all, because the labor of his hands keep consuming the resources in his community. Y'all not here. The reason Cain is angry is because he is forced to exist in a reality where Abel's sheep keep consuming his crops. Y'all not here. And as a consequence, Cain does something against his brother that is unimaginable because he is forced to exist in an environment with limited resources. Are y'all here today? He's struggling to survive. And as Nipsey said, when people don't have enough resources, their morals go out the door. And church, the reason our brothers and sisters are losing their lives to senseless acts of violence is not because they are pathological. It is not because we are inherently and fundamentally pathological and do not like one another. It is not because we lack morals and values. It is not because we don't have God in our lives. If there's any group of people that know God and love God and pray to God, it's black people. It is because of the material realities and the economic conditions in which we are forced to live on a daily, a weekly, a monthly, and an annual basis. And when people are forced to live in scarcity, it leaves them in cycles of despair, poverty, crime, violence, you name it. So what killed Nipsey Hussle and others like him on a daily basis is a predatory economy wherein the wealth of the masses is being siphoned and extracted into the pockets of the very few, leaving the masses to fight and compete with one another over limited resources and leftovers. And next week I'm going to explain how and why this wealth extraction happens. But for now, suffice it to say that it is clear that when you examine the American terrain, that the wealth of the masses is being concentrated into the pockets of the very few. Consider these statistics. The wealthiest 1% of Americans, 96% of whom are white, own more than the bottom 90% of Americans. The average employee needs to work more than a month in order to earn what the average American CEO earns in 1 hour. 90% of the stock market gains are going to the top 1%. Y'all not here. In 2017, an Oxfam study found, get this, that 8 rich people in the world, 6 of them Americans, own as much combined wealth as half of the human race. Y'all not here today. Y'all missed that. 6 people. That's about half the number of people on your row. 6 people in America own more combined wealth than 3.5 billion people. Y'all not here. The median black family is actually only worth $1,700, while the median white family owns $117,000. And so when the bulk of the resources are concentrated into the pockets of the few, it leaves the rest of our people, the rest of the American people, to compete for insufficient and limited economic resources. Nipsey Hussle was right. Nipsey was right. When there are no resources in your neighborhood and in your community, when you look out your door and you don't see the kind of establishments, opportunities that you see on the other side of town, you go into survival mode. And when you go into survival mode, your morality is not a priority because you don't experience morality. And research in the field of psychology has shown that scarcity will affect your behavior. I don't care how much you pray. I don't care how many morals and values you have, that when you are forced to exist in a context of scarcity, it increases negative emotions like despair and depression, and it'll cause people to do things that they never thought they would do otherwise. And I want to suggest to you today that the reason we are losing so many of our children and the reason there's so much social and economic despair in the country and in the world is because we are forcing humanity to live within scarce resources. And I want to illustrate for you today, I want to try and illustrate the underlying phenomena of what happens, come on y'all, what happens when you force society to live on limited resources. As I go all around the country, I do this illustration. It is a musical chairs illustration. Many of you have played musical chairs. You remember the game, but musical chairs is a very good example to help us illustrate the underlying economic phenomena and what happens socially and psychologically when you force people to live and to exist with limited resources. Are y'all here? So what I'll do is I'll get 10 chairs on a stage and I'll find 10 people to line up in front of those chairs. That's good, brother. I'll get 10 people with 10 chairs and I will tell them when the music starts playing, I want you to walk around these chairs, and when the music stops, whoever gets a chair, I will give you $100. And these are good, decent people. These are good-looking people, kind of people, praying, church-going people. I want you to notice their demeanor as they walk around these chairs. Now, come on, let's play the music. Yeah, when they walk around the chairs, when there are 10 chairs for 10 people, I want you to notice their demeanor. Look how kind they are. Notice the smiles on their faces. Notice how they are treating one another and how they are treating themselves, right? I want you to notice all that. But when the music stops, they are all very polite. They assist one another. They make sure that there's an opportunity for everyone. And here you go, brother. Make sure that everyone gets $100. Come on, let's give them a round of applause. And then what happens is I ask those very same people to stand up once again. And this time when they stand up, I remove 6 of the chairs. Yeah, y'all give me my money back. Give me my money back. Give me my money. Collect the money. Please collect the offering and give me my money back. This time I tell them, when I remove 6 chairs, I tell them to walk around the chairs. And when the music stops, whoever gets a chair, I'll give you $100. And I want you to notice what happens to their demeanor. I want you to notice about how they are interacting now that I have removed 6 chairs. Come on, play the music. Yeah. This time, as they are walking around the chairs, you'll notice that there's a lot of what? Tension. There's a lot of suspicion. There's a lot of anxiety. They're not as cooperative as they were before. And then when the music stops, all right, Deacon Johns, you lost. And then when the music stops, those who get a chair get their reward, but those who don't get a chair don't get their reward. And I want you to notice the difference between how they were when there was sufficient chairs. Perhaps they're sad, there's not as many smiles. These people are smiling. These folks aren't smiling. It would be wrong for me to tell these people that if you were just like them, you would get you a chair. That if you just worked hard like them, you would be successful. It would be wrong for me to lift up and elevate one of them as an example of someone who made it and made them feel as if the reason they don't have resources is because of something they have not done right. And the tension and the fighting that has happened, it has not happened because these people are fundamentally bad people or some kind of way pathologically criminal. It's happened because they have now been forced to exist. I need you to get this. It is because they have now been forced to exist in an environment predicated on scarcity. And when I think about what is happening in the world today and in our community, what we need today are more chairs. The chairs are a metaphor. The chairs are a metaphor, and I think Nipsey was right. It is a metaphor. It is a metaphor, and of those countless sisters and brothers like Nipsey who are dying on America's streets and dying in the prison industrial complex and dying intellectually in some of our schools and dying of disease because they have no health care and dying from environmental injustice because there's lead in their water and dying economically because the labor market forces them to compete in an environment of insufficient resources. Economic scarcity due to wealth concentration killed our brother and is killing so many of our other sisters and brothers. And while people applaud Nipsey for trying to create an economy in his community by reinvesting his own money there, the fact of the matter is it is not the responsibility of private citizens, nonprofit organizations, and the business community to provide more chairs or economic resources in the community. And can I tell you something? When you do not understand money, when you do not understand the macroeconomic realities of the money system, you will keep coming up with the wrong answers to the right questions. Can I tell you something? Shifting the demographics of the people sitting in the chairs is not solving the problems. Telling this person to stand up and this person to sit down, changing the diversity of the people in the chairs based upon their race, their gender, or their sexual orientation, that sounds good, but it is not solving the fact that they are still forced to exist, y'all not here, in an environment predicated on scarcity. It is the responsibility of the government of the people to do that, to provide more chairs. And our ignorance about money and macroeconomics causes us to be deluded into thinking that it is the responsibility of well-to-do athletes and entertainers and businessmen and even the financial sector to provide what the government of the people ought to provide. But that's what they want us to think. They want us to keep fighting amongst ourselves. Democrats fighting Republicans, whites fighting blacks, citizens fighting the undocumented. Because if we are fighting one another, then we are not focused on the little wizard that's behind the curtain. It is the responsibility. It is the responsibility of the federal government of the people to provide more chairs on this stage so that people can can sustain themselves, buy what they need for their families, and feed their children. For without an adequate money supply, the people don't have the resources they need. And the problem today is that policymakers at the federal level, members of Congress, and presidents past and present, some we voted for and some we do not, they have not been doing their job to furnish our economy with more chairs and an adequate money supply. And when that happens, when the government of the people, doesn't have enough chairs, they end up pushing and shoving for insufficient resources. They become casualties and are not able to reap the rewards of prosperity because of our current reliance on a system that does not give us enough chairs. But when you put more chairs on the stage, everyone is able to be pleasant. There can be peace and sufficiency because now they are able to sit and provide for themselves in a context of sufficiency rather than insufficiency. Are y'all here today? Come on, give my demonstrators a round of applause. Y'all can go, thank you. Nipsey Hussle said that when there are no resources in the community, people go into survival mode. He said, and when you're in survival mode, your morality goes out the window because you don't experience fairness and morality. And what is killing America today and what is killing our community today is not a need for more prayer. We got enough prayer. We don't need another sermon. What is killing us are not better morals and values. We don't need more role models or a new politician to be excited about. What is killing America, it is a set of economic policies that create conditions of scarcity for the majority of us and conditions of abundance for a few of us. And if we want young black boys and girls to remain alive, if we want more of our people saved from the prison industrial complex, we have got to change that material reality, and we will change that, which is why on May 1st, God has led me to launch a campaign, a nationwide bipartisan campaign of people of all backgrounds and all races and colors and creeds who seek to transform America by harnessing the power to create more chairs for the things that we care about. You want to improve? You want to improve education? Put more chairs on the stage. Don't give me a speech from Benjamin Elijah Mays or Barack Obama. Put more chairs on the stage. You want to address joblessness in our community? Don't give me some self-help guru and put them in front of our people. Put some more chairs on my community. You want to address mass incarceration, climate change, public education, affordable housing, health care? Don't shift the chairs around. Give us more chairs. We don't need more stories. We don't need more stories of the exceptional black person that made it out of the hood. We don't need another story of how Oprah made it and how Michelle made it and how Jay-Z and Meek Mill made it. And if they made it, you ought to be able to make it too. The devil is a liar. The story of the exceptional black person, our economists like Professor William Sandy Darity of Duke University and others have said that the story of the exceptional black person is a myth that they want us to buy into. It is a smokescreen and it is an illusion for the fact that what we need is a solution that addresses the scarcity. We need more chairs on the stage. But fortunately, church, there is a new economics. It is from a school called Modern Monetary Theory, and it provides powerful and incredible alternative to the disastrous economic policy making of the past 25 years from the very political party that is letting us down. While Republicans have used deficit spending to benefit their base and to fund priorities they care about, like going to war, giving tax cuts to corporations and the rich, the Democratic Party which overwhelmingly receives our support. The Democratic Party has aligned itself with the economics of Wall Street to further policies that extract wealth out of the pockets of the American people and into the pockets of the financial sector. And too many of our leaders and politicians keep giving us the wrong answers to the right questions, selling us solutions that further our reliance on the very financial institutions that brought about the global economic downturn. Black people vote overwhelmingly for Democratic candidates. Are y'all here today? And yet the economic policies we get from party leadership through Presidents Clinton and Obama and congressional leaders like Pelosi and Steny Hoyer furthers not frees. It keeps us in bondage and does not liberate us, but it keeps our dependence on the financial sector, which stands in the background and seeks to harm us. Our community is being destroyed by economic deprivation, gentrification in D.C. and all around the country, underfunded schools, double-digit unemployment, and a lack of hope and opportunity. Why? Not because we lack morals, but because of flawed economic policies from the very people that we end up voting for. Oh yes, I know. They do appeal to our racial sensibilities. They do appeal to our concerns about racial discrimination and our commitment to have symbols of racism like the Confederate flag removed. They do attend our MLK breakfast. They present themselves as being concerned about issues that we care about by talking about opposing bigotry and xenophobes like Donald Trump. But when they go back into their offices, they continue to follow the very same economic policies from people like Larry Summers and Robert Rubin, which made the extremism of Donald Trump possible and further extracts the wealth of the public into the pockets of the financial sector. Whenever the federal government does not use the power of the public purse to fund the things that the American people cares about, it forces the country, its citizens, state and local legislators to rely on borrowing and bank money from Wall Street, the very same model that got us in this mess. And the American people, church, should not have to rely on bank money to build roads and bridges. The nation should not have to rely on bank money to create jobs. The nation should not have to rely on taxes and borrowing to rebuild crumbling schools, provide health care for everyone, address climate change, provide free public college and affordable housing and public transportation. But that is exactly what is happening when our politicians and pundits fight over and squabble about how we are going to pay for those things. I need you to listen up. I know you want to hear a sermon on prosperity, and if you just turn around 3 times, God will give you something, but you got to understand the system that we are in. You hear them on the news. Whenever there's a conversation about priorities in the public interest, they debate how we're going to pay for it. Medicare for all, how are we going to pay for it? A Green New Deal, how are we going to pay for it? Free public college, how are we going to pay for it? And then the debate begins with politicians going back and forth about who should be taxed or what entitlement programs should be cut to pay for it. Bernie says we'll get it from millionaires and billionaires. Elizabeth Warren says we'll get it from corporations who should be paying their fair share. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says we'll get it by raising the marginal tax rate. And the Republicans, well, you know, they don't even give a care anyway. But the whole thing is a false choice. Tell your neighbor, it's a false choice. Modern monetary theory teaches us that if right now we have a threat to our national security and we have to, God forbid, go to war, members of Congress will not have a debate about who we are going to tax in order to spend on the war. Think about it. If we have to go to war tomorrow and spend $2 billion a day, members of Congress are not going to have an argument about where the money is going to come from. What do they do? They just create the money because that's what the government does for public private. Y'all not here today. See, the government can do what you and I cannot do because the government is not a household. In your household, you got to earn revenue in order to spend. You can't go to your printer to print out money to get you a new car. No, you got to go to work, honey. You got to work extra hours in order to spend. But the government, say this, the government is not a household. That means that the government, a sovereign government, can create its own money. It just goes to the printing press, to a digital computer, and funds priorities in the public interest. And as long as we don't exceed the limits of inflation, the federal government can create all the money we need for purposes in the public interest. So the next time Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the Democrats pass a devastating House rule like the pay-go rule. I know this is written way too abstract, which means that every dollar has to have some tax revenue. What you ought to be saying to yourself is they are using not only outdated principles, but they are using principles that are damaging to my community and damaging to the country because it causes them to underutilize the power of the public purse. And whenever they do that, it forces the public to rely on credit, from payday lenders, from rely on credit cards. The banks love it because when Congress does not provide us enough chairs for the American people, it causes us to rely on Bank of America and Merrill Lynch and all of the other banks. I know this might go over some of your heads, but it has very real consequences because black and brown children and our poor people all across the country should not have to wait for Jeff Bezos or the Walton family to be taxed in order to get Medicare for all. All the government has to do is spend it, don't lend it. The American people shouldn't have to wait for corporate tax shelters to be closed before we get a Green New Deal. Just spend it, don't lend it. Our communities should not have to rely on the tax revenue of rich people or issue bonds to Wall Street in order to get new schools built, to get modernization all across the country. Say this, just spend it, don't lend it. We don't have to increase taxes on nobody in order to spend. We don't have to take taxes from anybody in order to give teachers a pay raise which they deserve or to have free public college. What do we have to do? Just spend it, don't lend it. And that's what we're going to have if we're going to have a better future. I want to tell you, church, this whole week my heart has been heavy. My heart is heavy, but I still have a hope. And if we want our morals to come back, you have got to have a hope as well. We have to get our country back on track because, as Nipsey said, when there are no resources, our morals go out the window. We have all got to come together to understand the new economics, to get more chairs on the stage. And when we have 10 chairs for 10 people, there's nothing we cannot do. It's time out for tinkering around with the people in the chairs. I would not be a preacher of the gospel if I did not have a hope. I believe that truth crushed to the ground will rise again. I believe a day is coming when we'll all recognize the power to transform our society, not just for some, but for all of that. But to do that, we got to change our mind. We got to understand the money system. For if we change the way we think about money, we can change the world. Let us join hands to end the cycle of hopelessness and scarcity so that there are no more Nipsey Hussles who have to die and lose his life. Long live Neighborhood Nip.